Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tell Your Story Facebook Live. This is Gbenga Ogunjimi, the author of the book Borderless Voice, The Power of Telling Your Story and Defining Your Identity. I'm also the chief storyteller at Go Global Inc. I'm excited to start my new series, and this series is a book discussion of my book, Borderless Voice, The Power of Telling Your Story and Defining Your Identity. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be catching up with members of our community who've had the chance to read the book and review the book. I want to bring them online to come share their insights in the book, what resonated with them, and also how we can lean into their own story. Hopefully, the book helped them in some form or shape in strengthening the articulation of your story and what insight can we all glean from the book. Also, I want to have a situation whereby you read your book, you're one of your favorite authors wrote the book, and you wish you can catch up with them face to face and ask them, what was your thought when you're writing this? I think this way, is that what you're trying to say? So that is what I thought I do over the next couple of weeks. So let me tell you a little bit about the journey of writing a book. As you know, I host a national storytelling series called Tell Your Story. And over the past few years, I've traveled across the country and I've been able to hold workshops, direct coaching, executive coaching, all around the power of telling your story. I've had opportunity to work with people on the Wall Street. I have opportunity to work with people running for public office in the United States, Congress, and in their political campaign and shaping their stories. I have the opportunity to work with people who are crisscrossing from one industry to the other, and even have opportunities to work with a young millennial just trying to find their voice and try to define their brand. And I was able to see how influential the power of storytelling is. And what I did was extrapolate the recurring themes in my work with them around storytelling. I realized that every one of us believe that we definitely have a story to tell. But the problem is, do we actually believe that our story is worth telling? Do we believe that people really are interested and need to hear the story of someone like us? That is where there's the struggle. Everybody believes, yes, I have a story to tell, but is my story audience worthy? Is my story that compelling or inspirational? Could someone possibly be interested in someone like me? My story is not that exciting. It's not that interesting. And that is the reason why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I believe the contrary. I believe that your story is not just powerful, it's not just audience worthy. As a matter of fact, I believe the world cannot be complete without you contributing and sharing your own story. On a personal level, I believe your story is your greatest asset. I believe that your story is like your fingerprints. No one has your story. I believe that the whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a social entrepreneur, whether you're a professional, your story can accelerate and elevate you to your greatest life aspirations. So that is what the idea of Borderless Voice is all about. That once you give yourself permission to tell that story and define the identity, you become transcendent. You have the opportunity to find your voice, and that voice is going to break through cultural barrier, technological barrier, geographical barrier, and you can truly make a contribution to the world. So that is the reason why I wrote the book, and I thought, you know what? I've gotten a lot of feedback. A lot of people have given me positive feedback. Some of you have even told me areas of improvement. But overall, there's been a positive reception of the book. And I thought I'd use this opportunity to kickstart the series where people can come and listen to my own writing process, as well as the insight in the community, how this book has been uh, creating a ripple of light in our community, and how people have been applying the strategies of the book to themselves. So, what I want to do is to bring up our very first uh, guest in the series to come in and tell your story, as well as to come and share the reviews of the book and exciting things they do and the things they might be about. Our guest today is Mannie Chawi. Mannie Chawi and I work together. I've come to see him as an international business leader and working in the intersection of education and technology. And the work that he has done has spanned the United States as well as the continent of Africa. He has utilized his skills and expertise in partnership development, and he has also used that skill to give articulation and language to the people we work with so they can understand each other's cultures, each other's perspective, each other's languages. And he has become, think about it like this high level business language translator of multiple cultures and bringing them together. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Mannie to come to the broadcast live. I hope you can all see him. Hey, Mannie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gbenga. I appreciate that intro. I feel like I need to carry you with me everywhere I go now. So that's the day here, and not fumbling afterwards.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Oh, great. Yes, there is a formal bio. I should have read it. So you know what? No, let us just do this without the bio, and let's see how that goes out. So it appears it came out well. So that was good. That was good.
Yeah, I like it a lot better than my formal bio. So
that's good.
Going to use this recording all the time.
Oh yes, that's good. Good recording. That's good. That's good. Yeah. Oh, by the way, guys, you would have noticed like our brand expression today is totally different. It's a Friday. I decided to dress down, and but man went the opposite direction. That is the brand of Mannie. Mannie is always on point. It's like Obama. It is so polished, and I should have known that, but we just thought we brought some diversity in our parents today. We didn't think about it, but I think this is fun. This is fun.
Yeah. I mean, so, in all fairness, I didn't wear a tie today, so.
Oh, okay. Now you know. Now you heard it all. Now you heard it all. The man is always on tie. His 3-piece suit, and that is my next aspiration for 2019. If I can elevate, my brand awareness or expression or my sense of style. I think I'm going to set that as an intention and go for the rest of 2019. Oh, awesome. So, man, why don't you tell us, this is Tell Your Story Facebook Live. Why don't you tell us about your story, your journey, or also the work that you do about yourself?
Sure. So I'm commonly identified as what they call a third culture kid. And what that means is somebody who was born or raised in a culture foreign to their own. For me, I was born to Tanzanian parents in Dublin, Ireland. So I was born in Ireland. We lived there for 5 years while my parents were in their graduate studies. And then we moved back to Tanzania as they were part of this program that would send you to study anywhere in the world in a particular discipline, but you had to come back and then apply those skills that the government paid handsomely for. For my mother, it was in public health and psychiatry, and for my dad, it was in architecture. And their work on the continent, especially during the height of the AIDS crisis, which included building a clinic specifically to address that, combining, again, my dad built it and my mom ran it effectively, combining their knowledge that they had picked up over in Ireland, brought it back to the continent, applied it in real time to address a real crisis, got highlighted all over the world. And so naturally, we then got moved from living in Dar as the program continued to grow and expand to living in Zimbabwe, and then later here in the United States, where I finished high school and college. And so and still live presently. As you can tell by this, international journey and being this, third culture kid, I got exposed to all sorts of different mentalities and realizing at a very early age that there is no real singular normal, that we all are speaking roughly the same or similar languages, but as Gbenga said, we don't necessarily have the nuance of understanding each other. And as I was growing older and started, working and things like that, I started looking for those types of thinkers that were just a little bit outside of the box, and environments that allowed us to be agile and experiment, and without any judgment necessarily, but again, accepting that there is no one singular answer to any given challenge. And so, as a result, I spent most of my career working in startups, having founded a few myself as well, or working in startup-like environments. So even within large corporate entities, working in departments around a bunch of entrepreneurs, where we could again just experiment with things that were outside of the box, and it was a lot of fun. And in that journey, as you know, Gbenga, being in the startup world, you start to pick up all sorts of different skill sets. You're surrounded by all sorts of different people, so there's different kind of network and things of that you build, and it kind of becomes hard to identify who you are when you step outside of that. As of last year, I stepped down from running the company Layer Cake that I was really, really proud of, and was kind of faced with that conundrum of transition. Okay, how do I then recontextualize my own story for myself and moving forward? So Borderless Voice came at a perfect time for me, and in kind of that soul searching, and being able to realize that along my journey, both personally and professionally, they're so interlinked, they're so intertwined, and the skill sets that I've picked up, in the formal sense, we would call them, business development or operations management. I've even done community building work, and prior to that, even some work in video production, and found a way to weave them all in a way that it made sense for me. It made sense for the mission that we were trying to accomplish in one project or another. And where I'm at now is transitioning, rather than working for one particular startup or a couple of particular projects, rather than, I'd rather help that ecosystem, that community thrive. So work for the people that are supporting those organizations, and being not just the son of Africa, but the son of the U.S. and Europe. I'm in a unique position to do that. Borderless Voices helped me find my voice in that path forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that story. One of the things I get asked oftentimes doing career coaching is that a lot of people are trying to crisscross industries, and they struggle to establish value for skill sets that they have mastered in a certain industry.
That's right.
And even in that industry, they might be even considered a thought leader. But when it comes to transitioning into this new field, it seems as if there is a sense of it's very challenging to really establish how transferable those skill sets are. I've heard people say that sometimes it often feels as if they're trying to learn and speak in a new language.
Mm-hmm.
However, on a very deep down level, they know they are well qualified to do that job. But the articulation of, I've done something quite similar to this. As a matter of fact, we may call it different names, but it's very shared parallels with the industry I'm coming from. So still in this direction of multilingual business strategy, multilingual skills. By the way, should hashtag that. That might be the next content for my work. But either way, how have you found Borderless Voice to help in telling a professional story in such a way that it is borderless and it just kind of break through those lingual barriers that might hold you back from transitioning into a field of your desire?
So actually, I have the book here, and I think on page 83, you say it perfectly. It's the first line in chapter 7. Your story is not just your past to date. Instead, it's your proximity to your dreams. And that, to me, that first half really stuck, because coming from an African household specifically, we kind of box ourselves in of the journey we've traveled so far. And even just on average, an individual, we judge our own journey by how far we've come and how far we believe we've accomplished. Seldom do we look at it as that's just part of the story. You know, it's not a period. It's just a comma or a semicolon. The journey continues. You know, and the rest of that sentence, the rest of that journey is filled with how close you get to living out your dreams. And for me, in that period of transition, after having accrued these skill sets and this background, this expertise, both personally and professionally, you know, I had to take a step back and, as I said, recontextualize who am I, what have I done, what have I accomplished in a way that it makes sense even to me. You know, how does my story make sense? And are there some sort of you know, categories? Is there nomenclature that people can understand or that I can help people understand? So like the use of the terminology third culture kid, I didn't come up with it, but my peers and I who have similar backgrounds, we stumbled on it as well and said, hey, there is this thing here that exists that kind of fit into that bucket. And that explains in a way that is different than saying I've lived in all these different places as an adult, because then you already have your identity is resolved. But as a third culture kid, you are constantly in this mode of having to adapt, having to transform yourself into a certain environment or another. As an adult, that means that professionally I can do the same thing. I can transition from one project to another, from one responsibility to another, from one context, one country to another, fairly seamlessly compared to my peers who may have grown up in one environment versus another. It's a complete shift where they have to. It feels like they have to break completely down who they were and move themselves forward. And so it allowed me, that's a sentence alone, allowed me to really look at my own story, my journey so far as something that was empowering where I was going, and that there were interlinks, that it's not just my story up to date. It's not that I've lived in all these places and I've done all these things and I've worked in all these different things. Especially being in DC area based, a lot of the projects that I've done, I've worked on, you sign NDAs out the wazoo. So you can seldom really talk about what you've done and how you've done it, even if you're not working for the government. It's just people are that protective of the proprietary nature of the work that they're doing, their innovation, very innovative people, but also very secretive people, which can make collaboration difficult and it can make transitioning difficult. So I have to then scale back and say, okay, I may not be able to talk about the minutia of what I did here and here on these particular projects or this particular endeavor, but what are the general themes around the work that I've done that makes sense, that I moved from this particular project to this particular project, and so on and so forth. Because then if I can explain that to myself, I can better explain that to someone outside of me, and especially in a position of transitioning not just from project to project, but actual career transition. As I said, I'm trying to work more now with those that are supporting the startup ecosystems, whether that's in investors, even corporations or governments, or a mixture of all of those. I need to be able to explain to them that I'm a former founder as well as all these other things, and nimble in a way that it's difficult. It can be difficult to kind of pinpoint on paper, but with the right language, it can make sense.
Mm. And talking about that language and what you did to say, you know what, I'm coming from this career, I'm coming from this country, I'm coming from this culture, and you've been able to establish a sequencing of your portfolios and contributions that you've made in your career and your transitions. The very same way I tell people that when you want to tell a powerful story, particularly a career story, is the first thing you want to do is you want to sit down and take inventory of your life's trajectory. And one of the ways you can do that is to think about your life in terms of a book chapter. So there was a chapter for you in the United Kingdom. There was a chapter for you diving into your family identity and your family heritage. There was a chapter for you in establishing a communal community family purpose of legacy, of impact. There was a chapter for you, in America, in tech, in industry, in education. So all of these are the chapters that define the totality of your story. Those chapters, you can do that from a personal standpoint. You can also do that from a professional standpoint. From a professional standpoint, that is where you start to get your sense of contribution and portfolios. From a personal standpoint, that is where you start to shape and alter your own perception of self. And you start to see yourself really as a leader, really as a benefactor, really as a contributor, as opposed to you just participating in life. You are actually in a leadership position. You've created all these things. And that fundamentally shapes the way you tell your story. You're coming from the standpoints of abundance and not scarcity. And I talk about the distinctions in the book. So I think in telling that story, you definitely want to take inventory of what you've done. You want to take inventory of the chapters of your life. And also want to take inventories of the defining moments of your life. I'm going to come into defining moment. But so you talked about how your journey shaped your story and help you to build the brand that you have now, that you're building right now. If we can segue into international identity, particularly for those who may identify as immigrants, may identify as minority. In my own coaching community, we have certain ban on certain words you cannot even identify yourself with. Those two words are not one of definitely those words you cannot identify with. You can't say immigrant, you can't say minority. So I do this program where I have people go around and ask them, how would you identify outside of your own country? And it doesn't have to be what anyone thinks you should identify as. What is the one that best resonates with you? And I got the inspiration for that a few years ago. A woman in the United Kingdom published an article, that was a reference in the book, that she said, how come white people go overseas and they are considered experts, and the rest of us go overseas and we are considered immigrants when we have the same skill sets? And that was very forceful and thought-provoking for me. And I would even say mind-opening. And I had the same conversation. I was in a group conversation, coaching conversation. It's a very diverse group. People came from multiple cultures. And I would ask them, how would you identify? You wouldn't believe this, Mannie. Everyone in the group said something negative about where they come from, thinking I already have knowledge of those negativity. And I don't even know about this negativity. So they thought, let's call out the elephant in the room before this conversation proceeds further, so we can set a plain level field for conversation. But they didn't even know they had influenced my perception of the international brand. So speak to me about, if you may, how the book really gave you some thoughts to consider about this idea of international identity.
Well, honestly, piggybacking on that last point there about, people leading with the negative, it goes back to the 8 distinctions that you talked about in the book. And I think the first one, all of them really stuck out to me, but the first one on that first reading really just jumped out because it challenged me. Again, coming from an African perspective, the first distinction in the book, by the way, is scarcity versus abundance, which is something that, especially the millennial generation diaspora immigrants are starting to kind of wrestle with a little bit more. But ultimately, it's that question of, hey, looking at things from a place of lacking or from a place of an abundance of it, right? Having more than you'd ever imagined. And we are so accustomed of looking at ourselves from a place of lacking. And quite frankly, the world also does tell you that story. So even somebody like you asking innocent questions to people, you don't mean to draw out the negative, but we're so conditioned to see ourselves as negative, to see ourselves as lacking in so many different things, that becomes the story that we tell ourselves. And it kills ourselves. And I had to wrestle with a lot of that, having the conceptual understanding of that, but still having to then mind my language. How am I talking about myself to myself? How am I talking about myself to other people? Am I talking about my experiences, my background as a position of lack, or as something that comes from abundance? Are my experiences something that have drained me or weren't enough, or did they enrich me and only give me more? So a perfect example of how seemingly innocent a phrase that most of us have grown up with is you have to work twice as hard or four times as hard to get half as far. You know, it's a seemingly innocent and neutral statement, right? Parents use it, we've been using it in our communities for generations because it is also true. But the dangerous, deadly side effect that that has is it tells somebody like me, okay, I've still got to put in 4x the amount of effort than my competitor does. And even then, I'm still only going to get half as far. So my mind starts clocking in that no matter how much I accomplish, I am always lacking. I am always lacking. And having to come to terms where I could wrestle with that reality, you know what? If I'm constantly putting in four times the amount of effort, that means I have 4x worth of abundance that I've built up, that I've stored up. And to stop looking at it from the perspective of that one half that I'm missing out on. And so when I started, like you said, accounting for all the things that I've been able to do and accomplish and not just be a participant in life, because that's how you end up thinking that I'm just going along life is, well, I'm only still half as far. I've got to put in 4x again and 4x again. And you repeat that story enough to yourself, you start to kill your own drive. You start to kill you take that home and you put that onto your kids as a motivator. You kill their drive before they're even ready to face out into that world's reality. And so, it's a tough ask, and you have to be in that place where, if, like I was, conceptually I understood it, but was I willing enough to stop, to breathe, to accept it, to wrestle with that, to wrestle with a big part of my drive, a big part of my upbringing in an African household, even though we were raised all over the world. So at home we were in Africa, but everywhere else around the world, we were not. And even when we lived in Africa, in Tanzania and Zimbabwe, we still were an outlier. We lived different than the average people, and so it was hard to kind of place us. So there was a lot of kind of reckoning with that. But that's what I like about your book, and your perspective is clearly woven into that in a way that translates to a lot of us diaspora. Because even for myself, I either identify as third culture kid or diaspora. I seldom use the word immigrant, because it also means for me that I have to have one particular home. And again, I'm legally an Irish American. I'm ethnically Tanzanian. So where's home? Everywhere, right? And so I can't be an immigrant because I don't really have a home to go back to. Everywhere is home, if I allow it to be so. And that's the abundance. That's the privilege that I had. And it's taken me up until this point in my life to really to wrestle with that, to embrace that. And then once I took ownership of my story, tell that as my story, to lead with that as my story. And so when somebody asks me that question, maybe not you, but when somebody asks me the question that they're trying to elicit that negative response, or they're pushing that negative narrative, I can stand firm in my story. This is who I am. And I can re-educate them, not in an assertive way, not in an aggressive way, but rather asserting where we come from, that we as Africans come from a place of abundance. With my upbringing as a third culture kid, as a diaspora, there is an abundance here to be brought, and this is who I am.
I love that, because especially that last piece about an opportunity for education as a teachable moment. You've heard me tell my story when I came to America, and everybody has something to say about the other person, particularly in our Black community. African community have things to say about Black American. Everybody have things to say about each other. So I went in from a very natural, curious, innocent perspective. I want to find out for myself. And I moved to the Southeast Washington area, DC area, moved to Anacostia, east of the river. And I self-appointed myself as the cultural ambassador for African people. And I would educate and I would speak to people. And when the community, at least those within my field of influence, saw my innocent and genuine curiosity to connect and engage, the reception was overwhelming. And then they want to learn more about my culture, or was there an opportunity for us to go on. And I tell people, as a matter of fact, even the social enterprise that started, my landlord was one of my very first fellows to go overseas to serve in Senegal, in the Gambia and Senegal. And she even got married, while she was there. So what about if I had started the conversation with this woman with a negative?
Right.
She would never been able to go to the continent. She would never been able to make the contribution and found herself and found our voice and help in this process collectively of changing the narrative of our people, just because. And I may think that was innocent. I'm just trying to tell, the truth, but I'm making very dangerous impact to a potential relationship that may have a community-wide impact. So I think we should all think of the responsibility we have, to change this narrative that defined our community by the way we tell our story. So let's segue into personal and professional brand. And someone asked me a very, very innocent, not necessarily sort of a heartfelt, passionate question that really came from their heart. And she was like, I get all this, build your brand, be a thought leader, be all of that. And what about if that is not what you want? What about if you just want to live your life and just want to be you? And what about that? What would you say to that? So what I said to them is this. I think that is absolutely, absolutely fine. And I think that is your truth and authentic self and voice. But something you must keep in mind, whether you are intentional about it or not is the question. But what is constant is you already have a brand. And out there is a perception about you. There is the way people perceive your experience and what people may say about you. That is your brand. Taking authority over your brand and defining your identity is when you now become intentional. Say, I want to be the brand director of my story, of my message, to make sure that the perception I have for myself is consistent with the perception my community of the audience have with me. And I give some tools and insights. So how is this process, maybe the book or sometimes our interaction work together, you've been to some of my events together, impacted the way you not only told your story, but you're now building your brand going forward?
Actually, I think as you were explaining to the other person, like it comes down to intentionality. Because whether you mean to or not, your existence is already telling a story. It's told a story before you walk into the room, and then once you're in there, it just continues from then on. And that's not even to get onto the topic of this social media space in the online world that we live in the online world that we live into, where we're hyper connected all the time through all the things, sometimes quite literally, and all the people all over the world. And so for me, it's made me a lot more intentional about what I say, when and where and with whom, but not in the sense of withholding, but doing it with purpose and doing it with earnest. Again, owning my story. So sharing the bits and parts, again, about my journey, that they make me uncommon, but they are my story. I have no other background except for the one that I have. Whether it's personally, professionally, or both, that's just the life that I've led thus far in my life, right? And so why bother trying to put on a certain kind of facade, a certain type of hat? And so that is the story that I own, and in as many places and in as many venues as I can, as appropriate, of course, I share that. I share that insight. And it could, whether it could be something as simple as a Twitter post, or participating in a panel, meeting discussion from a speaking engagement or something like that, formal or informal conversations. As you said, there's always an opportunity where I can be my true, authentic self in telling my story. It isn't about me going around being the world lecturer and teacher and constantly scolding and forcing people to understand who I am, the worlds that I've come from, and how Africa isn't a country and things of that nature. No, but just like today, being my true and authentic self, I couldn't do this call without at the very least putting on a sports jacket. So here we are. It's just part of my story, and the part of the story of how I dress up is part of my upbringing. My grandfather, he grew up during the colonialism of Tanzania by the British, and the joke was he was more British than the Britons themselves. And one thing that he taught us from a very early age was you dress out of respect of your audience always. And so that's what I do is I dress out of the respect of the audience that I'm going to meet almost all the time. And the other thing that he said is you work yourself out of a suit. So the day you see me dressing like Gbenga on a regular basis, that's when you know I've made it. But I'm gonna keep it with these suits.
Wow. Well, in case I am disrespectful to some of our audience, unreserved apologies for that.
That was my grandfather, not yours.
Yeah, my unreserved apologies for that. And the American audience, particularly the Black audience, would normally dress like this on a Friday, on a weekend. So this is for you. Oh, great. So let's talk about monetizing the brand.
Yeah.
And one of the things with my background is I think one of the reasons why my community is very filled with people who are, give me 1 second. It's very filled with people, give me 1 second. You can come in and I'm on a Facebook Live.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long you gonna be on it?
I'm about wrapping up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, my community is very filled with people who are like coming from the social impact space and nonprofit space, and that community have a lot of challenges with establishing monetary value for their expertise. And the thing is, we're changing the world. So there's a lot of wrestle with that. So in terms of monetizing the brand, any insight and recommendation or from the book for you?
Yeah. So I mean, admittedly, I'm still a work in progress on this stuff, but I think it was point number 9 around monetizing the brand, which is being the international impact of the world. Now, admittedly, yes, I've done work internationally, primarily U.S. To Africa, and in that space, whether it was for my own startups or doing some consulting work, but bridging the gaps back and forth, there was an international presence, but it was also through a very specific lens. I was the startup guy, business development consultant, working on projects. It was kind of narrow, and specifically in a train of U.S. Africa, Africa, U.S., and then even further defined, U.S. East Africa, U.S. Now, as I'm turning my gaze more towards, bridging again my story with the realities of the world as well. Of it's more than just U.S. and Africa, but a European component as well. I've been able to reach out and identify certain organizations that are doing the type of work that I aspire to do. That are, again, that getting closer to the dream version of my story, and organizations that are at that phase, which I hope to get. Which is supporting these the ecosystems there, supporting startups and projects, whether they're the corporations or incubator spaces or investors, people in Europe that are doing really phenomenal work to encourage this collaboration between the EU and Africa and vice versa, and helping the people that are already doing the work. How do you support those that are already doing the work in country? Like Microsoft is doing in West Africa. They're working really, really well with the startup ecosystem that's there by just amplifying the work that they're doing, providing them with more resource and support. Rather than reinventing the wheel, they're going, hey, you guys are already solving the problem. How can we help you continue to do that more effectively, more efficiently, now with more resources? So now my work is to translate, my background in the work that I've done as a founder and in the consulting side, and specifically in the U.S. Africa and East Africa, to this more unifying global space of Europe, U.S. and Africa. And as I said, that's a work in progress, but it means finding the right people, the right organizations at the right time. And so It's one that once that shift happens for you, it means shifting a good chunk of your original audience or your intended audience to finding the right ones. And once you do, the people that understand the value that you bring to the table, they'll understand the dollar amount as well. Because I know that especially from our backgrounds, we tend to be a little bit more hesitant. Whether it's the African background, startup background, or creative a community space, we tend to be a little bit more reserved. I'm not quite sure I know enough because we're still thinking of that. We've still got halfway to go. We've only done half as much, so we start discounting ourselves. But rather, I'm looking at it from a place of abundance, like being able to build up a lot of different skill sets in wide different areas across the globe. And here's the value. And the people that work in those space, they appreciate that and are working with me on that. I'm hoping to continue to do that work further.
Excellent. Excellent. One of the things I said in the book is think about the last time you went to a restaurant. And the very first thing they come to you and they ask you the question, have you been served? How can I help? As opposed to no. So when they ask you the question, you probably said no and so, oh, please follow me. And they set you up on the table. They give you the menu. Can we start you up with water, lemon, ice? Tea? How would you want it? And they give you the menu, and they were so nice. They came back and checked in with you. Everything okay? Everything going well? Do you need anything? Water, drinks, appetizers, dessert? Let me know. And when you're about to leave, you say, you know what? This person is so nice. And you took out your checkbook or the bill, you give them a very generous gratuity, and you didn't walk out and say thank you for the service. You not only did you pay for the service, you added a very generous tip to that to appreciate the service. And when I shared that analogy to some of my people, it was when the click happened that if you would substitute selling and serving and realizing you're doing the very same thing. But the distinction is somebody said, well, because it is not service because it's not monetary. It is service because it has value. And the greatest value is mutually beneficial. And I think that change in mindset has really helped a whole lot of people with giving themselves permission to establish a financial value for their talent and for their expertise, whether in public service, whether in social enterprise, or whatever they may be. So there's about 10 distinctions in the book, 10 strategies in the monetization strategies in the book that I encourage you all to go check out. And you can start to see how you can not only monetize your story, but it can also monetize your talents, you can monetize your brand, and you can establish the right monetary value for the contributions that you're making. So, Mannie, what books or authors the book reminded you of?
Yeah, so actually, I've got one here. There's a couple that it reminded me of, but the one that I think was was most was most pertinent is "Her Freed Soul" by my friend Brianna Ariel, because to
Okay.
me it feels like the perfect end result of somebody reading this book.
Uh,
They almost feel like spiritual successors to each other. I read them in reverse order, and I was like, okay, they actually done in the backward.
ah,
Brianna took her story that is it's rich. It's full of challenge, but it's also so rich in triumph and love and nurturing, and just wrote it out as it was. It's a very earnest collection of poetry that follows linearly across this book, and it's just so amazing to me how somebody taking ownership of their story, taking ownership of their craft, bringing those together, and turning that into a product that you and I can consume and get enriched by. It is something that I actually revisit. I just lent it to a friend of mine actually, so that she can read it because it's just such powerful writing. And you and I both know, we all know that when storytelling comes from an earnest place, there's just certain power that's just intangible. You can't equate it to anything else. You feel it. We've all been at movies where you see Denzel crying and you're crying with him, right? Because it's coming from such an earnest and good place. Or when you see people elated, right, that you share in their joy, and that definitely comes across in Her Free Soul by Brianna Ariel. That's available on Amazon. As I said, it feels like somebody who I'm not sure if she's read your book prior to this, but it very much feels like somebody who's read this book, realized her story, actualized it, and put it out there onto the market. It's phenomenal.
Wow, then she must get on this broadcast.
She really should, yes.
Yeah. It would be interesting for us to have to share perspective to storytelling, our personal stories. Yeah, so let's make that happen. My only addition to that is for the next set of people you want to recommend our books to, you can do that by giving them the link to the Amazon page and not lend it to them to read. They can just go ahead and they can go ahead to our website at Amazon and purchase for themselves. And they can buy additional copies to gift out to people.
Will do.
Oh, great. Excellent. So why don't you tell us about, in terms of what you've been up to, what you're up to currently that you want the audience to know about?
Yeah, sure. So currently right now I'm working on a project. I can't get into too much detail, but maybe we can revisit at a later time. But something that I do want to bring up and share with the audience while I've got them here captive is a project that dear friends of ours are running. So Lola Adeloso of Diaspora Rise Up and Rashida Patterson of Diasporas in America Fund are running a relief campaign for Cyclone Idai, which has just devastated Mozambique, Malawi, and most of that Southeast Africa part of the continent. And for their particular campaign, it's really earnest and focused towards the first responders. Much like here in the United States, when we were hit with the attacks on 9/11, first responders relied almost entirely on their own cell phones, as well as families and friends, to reach out to their peers and the community that they were trying to serve. It's the same thing is happening right now in the Cyclone Idai affected region. Their first responders are using their cell phones and to communicate with each other and to communicate with the community there. And the best way to keep them working, as we remember here during 9/11, and we were all using our cell phones to keep in touch with each other, and first responders were as well. It clogged the network, but it has also clogged up our phone bills. So what we can most do that could be beneficial to those that are helping others is to help them have better access to the mobile networks over there, and to be able to share that amongst themselves in that community of emergency responders and the community that they're serving. So there's a link to it on my Instagram page. It's Instagram /Mannie_Chowie. But I know Gbenga's got the link as well. He can probably share that with you. But if you just look up DIA Fund, they're running a wonderful campaign, and it should be on your screens right now.
Excellent. Yes, please go ahead and support amazing project, amazing people. Please go ahead and do that. So what about how can people directly link up with you and contact you, the work, and reach out to you personally?
Oh, absolutely. So I just mentioned my Instagram page. That's one way. I'm on almost all social networks under the same username, Mannie_Chowie. I'm on Twitter as well, Mannie_Chowie, and LinkedIn. So yeah, just hit me up on there, follow me, drop me a message. I'm always happy to communicate, and we can take the conversation wherever it goes.
Oh, nice. And lastly, I just want to get your thoughts about Africa or Black America. How can we better tell our story in your own opinion?
You know, most people usually wrap up with the easy question. I see you've done another. Okay, so how can Africans be better? Three things come to my mind. Yeah, I would say three. The first one is kind of, two in one almost. But the first one is tell and amplify stories. There's all of us here have stories to tell, and quite frankly, no story is too small, no story is too infinitesimal. Everyone is important, and especially from underrepresented communities, we really do need to tell more of our stories and amplify them as well. So once you're done telling your story, amplify it. Tell us about your story, and for your community to do the same. If your friends, your peers, or even someone you don't know is telling a story, amplify that, whatever it is. The second way kind of feeds into the second suggestion kind of feeds into that as well, which is amplifying those stories. And the best way to do it, you said it earlier, right? Is to buy. It's to use our purchasing power, support the storytellers. So buy their books, buy their music, their art, whatever it is, whatever the means that people are creating. Pay full price. You don't ask Steven Spielberg for a discount to his movie ticket, so don't ask our people for the same, because chances are it took us more to get there as well. So for our storytellers, the best way to support them is really with your dollars and full investment. And for some people, it may also be doing something like involving them in marketing campaigns that you may be running. If you're in a position where you can hire somebody as a consultant, bring them in as a speaker and pay them for that, do that. That's another way, again, you can contribute to that person telling a story. And now ultimately it enriches any and everyone else. So even if you're within an organization, there's an opportunity for you as an entrepreneur, as an internal leader in an organization, to still be part of the supporting ecosystem for other storytellers. And the third way, none of these, by the way, in any kind of order, but they kind of fit in, is to create more of an environment that is encouraging of storytelling and in all the different ways that it showcases. Again, if you've got the ability to hire and bring somebody on board, please do, but allow them the same breadth and depth and room to succeed or fail. I like thinking of the story of Ryan Coogler's set for Black Panther. Whether it's interviews with the cast or with the crew, even if it's somebody who was serving the sandwiches there, everyone has such utter love and respect for him and the environment that he created that it allowed everyone to shine. And he let them lead with their area of expertise. So whether they were the cinematographer or the wardrobe designer, location scouts, again, cast and crew, he allowed people to bring in their expertise as well as their backgrounds, their nuanced perspectives into their craft in this space as they were trying to storytell. And as a result, it's become this phenomenal movement more than just a movie. So in as many ways that we can create these environments for storytellers to thrive. And that does mean allowing some room for people to fail and that not be the end of their story, but rather a learning opportunity to build on to the next one. Because quite frankly, we don't always need you to start something new. You could start from exactly where you are.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mannie, for your time with us and telling us your story and giving us your unique perspective and window into the work that you're doing, particularly the opportunity to be a part of the project of Diaspora Fund. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Well, that is it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So what you can do is to go to my website. It's online to order for the book, gbenga.org. It's going to take you to Amazon. You can directly go to Amazon and type Borderless Voice, the power of telling your story and defining your identity. If you already have the book, if you can review the book, that would be excellent as well. If you read the book, you reviewed the book, you also want to be a part of this discussion series, send me a message directly on social media, or you can send a message through my website, and then we can invite you to also come tell your story and also share your insight with the book. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mannie, and we look forward to connecting again the next time we come online next week. Thank you all. Thank you, Mannie.
Thank you so much for having me, Gbenga. Thank you all.
You're welcome. Yeah. Excellent.